5 Live Boxing.
Boxing is in the news again for all the wrong reasons. It looks like trouble. We had a sold-out all-British heavyweight title fight at the O2 on Saturday, but Dillian White has failed a routine drug test and his showdown with Anthony Joshua is off. Joshua will hopefully still fight. An opponent is being sought, trying to be finalised. The show must go on. Over the next 30 minutes, we will try and put the latest mystifying boxing puzzle together. I'm Steve Bunce, and this is 5 Live Boxing. Now, helping me make sense of the situation will be the promoter, Eddie Hearn, and he'll be joining me in a few minutes' time to talk about it. Now, tonight, right now, at this actual moment, I was meant to be at a very plush red carpet event to celebrate the fight, to celebrate the entire night at the O2. No expense was going to be spared. That was cancelled, and now the BBC have called me into a studio with former world super featherweight champion Barry Jones. And let me just say before we start that this is a moving story. It's 21:04 now. We may have an update by 21:06. It's that type of event. Barry, thanks for joining me. I've got to ask you straight away, I guess, what was your reaction when you found out that Dillian White had failed another test?
Absolutely deflated, Steve. Boxing was riding on a crest of wave last week, where Inoue won another world title at a new weight, and then Terence Crawford beat Errol Spence in a generational fight and a generational performance in Las Vegas, and then this. And as deflated I am, I'm not shocked anymore, and that's what makes me sad more than anything.
Really
that I'm not shocked. And it's a saddening time.
Yeah, that's it. What we had in about a space of 5 days in Japan at 11 o'clock in the afternoon, we had Nui moving up to win a world title at his fourth weight. And then a few days later, we had the showdown, the final and belated but brilliant showdown between Terence Crawford and Errol Spence, won by Terence Crawford. Barry was at that fight in Las Vegas, and he looks very good for it as well. Now, Barry, before you and I move on with this, let's just recap a little bit what happened. The news broke on Saturday that Dillian had a problem and that the fight was in jeopardy. And this was a statement that Matchroom released on Saturday afternoon. Today, the Voluntary Anti-Doping Association, VADA, informed Matchroom, the Association of Boxing Commissions and the British Boxing Board of Control that Dillian White had returned adverse analytical findings as part of a random anti-doping protocol. In light of this news, the fight will be cancelled and a full investigation will be conducted. And then we heard from White himself, and he wrote on a release that went out on social media, the various platforms. He said, "I am shocked and devastated to learn of a report by VADA of adverse findings relating to me. I only learned of it this morning," this is on Saturday, "and I'm still reacting to it. I've also just seen that the fight is being cancelled without any chance to demonstrate my innocence before the decision was taken. I can confirm without a shadow of doubt that I have not taken the reported substance in this camp or at any point in my life. I am completely innocent and asked to be given the time to go through the process of proving this without anybody jumping to conclusions or a trial by media. I insisted on 24/7 VADA testing for this fight, as I have done voluntarily and at my own expense for all my fights for many, many years. This is the first time that I have been reported. This is not the first time that I have been reported as having an adverse finding for a substance which I have not taken. And as I did last time, I will again prove that I am completely innocent. In the meantime, all I can do is express my extreme disappointment to boxing fans who will miss out on what was sure to be a great event." And that's Dillian White responding to VADA's the news from VADA and the news that Matchroom had decided to pull him from the bill. That doesn't mean that the show's cancelled. It doesn't mean Anthony Joshua's not fighting. Right now, as we sit here, we don't have an opponent for Joshua. Eddie Hearn will be joining us in a moment, Barry. And as far as we know, the show is still going ahead. It's you mentioned there, Barry, the great week we had, and then we've fallen into this horrid hole, this disgraceful hole. Horrendous would be a word I'd use.
And yeah, it is. And let's not forget, this was a fight we look forward to. This was a fight that we find out if Joshua still had that fire in his belly. But no, that took him to a world title. That took him to an Olympic gold medal. That made him a favourite of boxing fans. That has been lost lately, and this was the fight that would force it out of him.
Because he knew he'd have to fight in this.
Well,
we knew it wouldn't be easy. He'd have to push it. He'd have to inevitably push himself.
Stylistically, it was that sort of matchup for him, and also the history that those two have. I think pride would take a big play in this fight, but. No, first of all, Matchroom did the right thing. They have to pull it. They have to pull the fight. I think they've learned that from previous instances. I think that's.
You mean last October with Conor Benn and Chris Eubank Jr. when they had this information and they didn't pull the fight instantly. They left us in limbo for 36 hours.
Yeah, but they're trying to get the show going, aren't they? And I understand that, but this time they're doing the right thing. We got to pull this fight first and foremost, and then try and save the show. I think that's the right idea. The thing with Dillian is that I think that statement's a little bit contradicting. I think at some parts of it, and I would say that he's right. It's not the first time that he's had to prove his innocence, and that's where there's going to be a real spotlight on him, because it's not the first time. He did prove his innocence, and so he says he did. Yeah, I think that was a technicality, but no, he's going to have to do it again. 2012,
at the start of Dillian's career, he failed a routine test for one of those bizarre over-the-counter energy drinks which are no longer readily available. And he served a 2-year ban. He came back from that, and that's part of the Dillian White story. I'm not coming out sympathetically in Dillian's favour, but that's all part of his backstory. In 2019, in the summer, he failed a test before he fought Oscar Rivas, and that's the one that, on a technicality, he was not cleared. The charges were dropped in very early December, and then in the middle of December, he fought in Saudi Arabia on the undercard of Anthony Joshua, winning his world title, regaining his world titles from Andy Ruiz. And he's marched on since then, Dillian, and become, let's get this right, even though he lost to Tyson Fury last year, he's become a bit of a cult hero. He's a bit of a hero. He's got a fabulous backstory.
And a rich man.
And a rich man.
Let's not forget that. And whether you like it or not, and I'm not pointing any fingers at anybody, I've learned not to do that anymore, he is going to be held accountable for that. That's how it is. And if this is true, and if he can't prove his innocence, then this is a dangerous sport, Steve. This is not a football. This is not a football where you can get hurt if you do everything by the book.
Yeah, and that's what several fighters have come out and said over the last 48, 66 or 50 or so hours. Enough on Dillian White, and people might think we've given Dillian White too much time. I just wanted to do that side, because he's going to have his say when it comes. We just pointed out. Let's have a little look at AJ. This is not the first time this has happened to AJ. It's not the first time that someone's failed a drug test quite close to a fight. Maybe not this close, but failed a drug test. Of course, Big Baby Miller famously failed a drug test, a serious drug test, back in 2019 before his fight with Anthony Joshua, which was meant to be the 1st of June. And in the end, Andy Ruiz came in, and we know what happened there. Anthony Joshua suffered his first defeat as a professional and got dropped and stopped. And of course, before that, and people forget this, there was the Carlos Takam replacement for Kubrat Pulev at about 10 days' notice, but quite a drastic change in opponent and style. AJ handled Takam okay, injured his nose, but that was 2017, 2019, he's dealt with it. Assuming he fights on Saturday, and there's a short list of about 10 or so boxers, that's probably only a short list of about 2. We don't know. Maybe Eddie Hearn will throw some light on that. How will that affect him, Barry? As a former fighter, did you have any late replacements, and will it have a massive effect on someone of AJ's experience?
I think because of past history, I think it'll have a huge effect. Of course it will. I think they train diligently for a specific style, and with White, that's an erratic style. Now, if he also has to change to someone who's more formatic in their movements, or a taller fighter, or a short, whatever it is, a bigger puncher or a faster hand, it can change how you on your outlook on the fight. And also, what happened the last time this happened? No, we were in New York. I remember we were in New York for Amir Khan versus Terence Crawford in the April, and that news came out. And then he boxed in July, and everything went. And his career hasn't been the same since. Even though he's regained the title, it hasn't been the same since. And that's the worry. Will there be mental scars there?
So he's training to fight a guy that's 6'4", 6'5", who's orthodox. So basically, by a simple bit of mathematics and just looking at the facts and the stats, I guess you can rule out any southpaws. And there's 3 or 4 southpaws that are floating around whose names have been mentioned. And I would suggest any 6'6" southpaw is not going to make the cut and get the selection. Would that be fair comment, Barry?
It'd be 100%. It would be fair, but it's not so much that. It's Dillian White's a looping puncher. All his punches are wide and they're hooks and swings, and he punches from far out because he has a long reach. But he's readable. No. If he gets a fight who's tall and punches down the line, like Anthony Joshua does, straight punches, turns from his hips, everything's correct, that's a different way to train. You're blocking punches differently. And if you've been training for weeks to block wide shots and all of a sudden you're having punches come through the middle, people think you just block punches, but it
doesn't work that way.
It's totally different, yes.
Now, this would have been his second fight with Derek James, who, of course, was in the corner of Errol Spence and got a bit of criticism for one or two things. Maybe it was a bit harsh, but hey, that's just the way we work in boxing. You train a loser, you train a winner, and he suddenly loses, you get a bit of stick. That's just the harsh realities of boxing, especially in our online world. How do you think Derek James and AJ, and obviously I'm going to ask Eddie when he comes up, how do you think AJ and James will be dealing with this? Derek James will be dealing with this, Barry?
They'll want to fight. I think all that work.
You're convinced they'll want to fight?
I am convinced they want to fight.
I hope so.
There will be certainly a question and a thought that maybe we pull out because who are we going to get? But I think,
and we can go straight to Deontay Wilder. That's the backstory. There's this massive Deontay Wilder fight in December, January or February via the Saudis that comes to 50, 60, 70 million.
And that's why they have to fight, because they can't go straight into a Wilder fight. From what we've seen from AJ still now, where he is right now, that fight's not a competitive fight if he walks in without any more preparation, without more in live fight experience again.
Because he fought 12 rounds with Jermaine Franklin a couple of months ago.
Which he boxed quite well, Steve.
And basically, I felt that he was trying things then. Hear
them do their thing in the Premier League. Then hear what they have to say on BBC Sounds. Subscribe to the Players channel and get inside the footballing minds of Premier League icons. From the Footballers Football podcast.
I'm getting stick for arguing with one of their players, and that's the player that they was booing themselves not too long ago. So
to Football First with Troy Deeney and Jermaine Defoe.
I just laughed. I went, don't worry, you'll play me next week.
And much more to come as we head into the new season. Real football talk straight from the players. The Players Channel. Listen on BBC Sounds.
Eddie Hearn joins us now. Eddie, going to get straight into it. What was your reaction when you found out, and when did you find out that there'd been this adverse finding in Dillian's latest test?
Well, I was away. I was on East Coast time, and I received the email, I think it was around 2 a.m. Saturday morning UK time. And, you know, it's been a rough year going through the Conor Benn stuff, and you kind of become a little bit numb to it in the end. I mean, with a week to go before one of the biggest fights of the year, shocked, dumbfounded, just numb by the news, you know. And obviously from there, you know, how it works is there's multiple people on that email, but most of them are on UK time and most of them are asleep. Including Anthony Joshua, or he might have been asleep, but I didn't really want to give him that news before bedtime because obviously there's a hope that we can still have a big fight on Saturday night. And he got the news in the morning, and I actually woke up to a message from him, which was unbelievably calm, which was actually to say, you know, in true AJ style, I'm sorry that this has happened, and I know how much work you put in, and I thought, don't worry about me, mate. You've just trained 12 weeks in 120 degrees in Dallas. So now it's time to go to work. But, you know, shocked, surprised, and, you know, a big blow, obviously.
Yeah. So, Eddie, to cut straight to it, so is there a hope that, to use your phrase, that we can still have a big fight on Saturday? Do we have a show, and do you have an opponent?
I mean, I actually forgot I was coming on to speak to you tonight, Bunsey, because I've been working from this morning and interrupting calls when you called. The absolute plan is to have a show on Saturday night. And, you know, it's a minefield because obviously everybody puts their name in their hat and the credible ones want, you know, 10 mil, a private jet and my left lower limb within the contract. But at the end of the day, AJ, this is about Anthony Joshua.
Of course it is.
This is, and, you know, I don't want to put a jinx on his performance on Saturday, but the guy's looked unbelievable in camp with Derek James. I've never seen him in shape like this. I've never seen him so motivated, and he's desperate to fight. And, you know, almost to the point where, look, whoever it is, get me someone. And the plan, of course, is to get the most credible opponent, someone who can test him, someone that can prepare him for Deontay Wilder. We know the undercard's great. You know, you got Hrgovic against McKean, you got Chisora against Washington, you got Big Johnny Fisher in his first title fight.
Sure.
But, of course, we want a big, credible fight. And I believe that in the next hour, that fight will be signed and there will be an announcement tonight or first thing in the morning.
And Eddie, are we down to... Barry Jones is with me here, and I know he's got a question he wants to ask you, but are we down now to one or two? Or are we down to just one single human?
No, we're down... I think at this point, with such short notice, you need more than one plate spinning, you know, just in case, because people try to disrupt, people try and ruin things, people try and outprice themselves. But, you know, we've got the guy who we think's the right guy, and we've got others who are waiting as well. But, you know, the list has gone from, you know, I even had a top 20 cruiserweight from the UK applying for the position of this fight, you know, up to Andy Ruiz, who, you know, wants to take the fight, but on, you know, particular conditions that just quite honestly are unacceptable. But, you know, you got to go through those processes, but you got to find the ones that are real. And, you know, at 6 days notice, I think we've done a great job.
Yeah, so Andy Ruiz has ruled himself out of his offer. Let me ask you this, Eddie, and I say I understand it's still that tricky time with contracts out there, but just can we confirm that the two main heavyweight fights on the undercard are still intact?
Yeah, we're talking to everybody. I mean, you know, the format's changed considerably. Obviously, there will be an opportunity for the public who, you know, don't want to watch AJ and a big night of heavyweight boxing to get a refund. You know, we're talking to DAZN, likely that the fight could become a part of your subscription rather than a pay-per-view event. So the dynamics have changed, but it's very much a big heavyweight night, and we want to keep as much of that intact as possible. So that's what we'll be trying to do for sure.
Ed, you said that Anthony took the news really well, but how is he now? Now he's had a chance to digest that news, and with obviously he knows how important it is to keep active with a bigger fight looming. How is he feeling now, not knowing who he's going to fight exactly?
I think the initial response, you know, when I got the news, I wasn't sure how he'd take it and if he'd want to fight. You know, his first reaction is, "Who can I fight?" Yeah, and I think, reaction. You know, but I think any fighter, you know, you've trained for 12 weeks. He's worked so hard in his training camp, you know, and I think he wants to show people. I think he wants to show himself that performance and the one he expects after a great training camp with Derek James. You know, all the feedback from sparring this time around has been fantastic. You know, he's had, you know, various sparring partners having to leave camp. He's looked devastating. He's looked spiteful, and everyone was really excited about that fight. So we don't want someone that's going to come in and just, you know, not be competitive. We want a real heavyweight that's going to ask questions, be dangerous, and allow him to showcase what he's been working on. So for him, and, you know, obviously financially he's done very well for himself, but financially this is a big bath that he'll be taking to fight on Saturday night. But he's not really about that. He wants to prepare himself for what's ahead. And I think it would be a huge blow for him after 12 weeks of training to not fight, have 5 or 6 weeks off, and then go into another camp. It kind of puts everything back. Yeah, you know, right now we're looking at Deontay Wilder for January. If we don't fight on Saturday night, maybe we fight in October, November, and then we don't fight Wilder, and it's a mess. Yeah. So we've been working hard these last 48 hours. It's not been easy,
I can
but
believe
we're
you.
pleased to where we got to, and an announcement is imminent.
Yeah, but Eddie, getting to the list, let's say it's 1, let's say it's 2, let's say it's 3. How many of you, I mean, I don't need names, it'd be lovely if you gave them. How many of you are on that call to go through them? Is it you, AJ and Derek James and someone from the Zone, or is it you and AJ and Derek James, someone from Anthony's publicist company he works with? How many of you, I mean, I like the nuts and bolts. How many of you are involved?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to sound arrogant, but I've got a good eye for the right fight.
Sure.
And, I know this division like the back of my hand. So as soon as the announcement came, there's 6 guys in my head that I think that would suit the bill.
Yeah.
And from there, it's reaching out to those, seeing who's realistic, and sending the names to AJ and 258 and Derek James for them to review them. There hasn't been a fighter that he said no to other than a southpaw, which, as you know, having done orthodox sparring for 12 weeks or 8 weeks, however long he's been sparring,
I just said
he's
that
just not going to go in with a southpaw. You got Dempsey McKean, then you got Hrgovic. Hrgovic has been sparring himself for a southpaw for 8 weeks in Dempsey McKean. He's also mandatory for the title,
So it's a stupid fight for Hrgovic.
Yes, and McKean is a southpaw. The Derek Chisora rumours that were flying around there, it's not a fight that I want to see personally, and
Just
also
nice
their
to
friends.
get Derek in the news.
Yeah, and then you got Gerald Washington, who a lot of people thought it was him, and I think that's an okay fight, but it's not him.
Yeah.
Because I want him to fight Chisora, because I actually think that's a 50-50 fight, and it's a decent fight. So, it's an international opponent, and it's a guy that's been in some big fights, and it's a guy that will pose a threat, and will try and win. And it's a guy that I think AJ can showcase what he's been working on.
Yeah, and Eddie, let me ask you this, and I really appreciate your time tonight, friend. Have you spoken to Dillian, or is that not, quotes, your job? Is that being done by different people? Have you spoken to Dillian?
No, I spoke to, when the news came, I spoke to his management team, and they were in total shock. None of it makes sense, Bunsey, in all honesty.
I know, it doesn't sound like it does.
I know, and but you can't ignore it. That's the problem, and
can't hide from it either.
Although Dillian is not contracted to us, and we don't have an obligation in that respect to represent him in the same way. We've worked with him for a long time, and he's got a big job on his hands now to go through this arduous process that we've just been through for the last year with Conor Benn,
of course,
to try and clear his name. Unfortunately for him, he had a week. Before the fight, there was no process that would allow him to clear his name. We learned a lot from the Conor Benn situation as well.
Is that why you called it off so quick?
No, because but basically we speak to the opponent, and now we've been through that process. Every test is different, every level is different, And when we spoke to AJ, there was no doubt but to terminate the agreement with Dillian White. Before we look for some guidance from the British Boxing Board of Control. We've now been through that process with Conor Benn. We also received we received criticism for that process, and we learned from that process. Hands up, I think you do. But I think it's still an area that needs work, quite frankly, because there is no disciplinary process now. This wasn't even a WBC test.
Yeah, of course.
This was additional layer of VADA testing that Matchroom paid for, to make sure that testing was stringent. But there's no disciplinary process under VADA. It's a reporting agency that do a good job in that respect. So, I don't know. We're back in the situation of, in good news, someone that has got performance-enhancing drugs in their system has been found in that respect.
Yeah, so that's
but
good.
it's still not far and wide enough without paying the money for each individual fight. And it's something that we're looking at in more detail to see how we can have a wider net, if you like, across boxing.
So, Eddie, how close were you for scrapping the show?
I mean, to be honest, Barry, it really comes down to AJ, because when you're talking about all of a sudden a fight coming off pay-per-view, pay-per-view receives a lot of criticism, but ultimately it enables the fighter, a huge name, to be able to be in big fights for a lot of money. And the public don't like it, but that's the model that works to make big fights for big name fighters.
Yep, that's it.
So when you take a fight off pay-per-view, the financial dynamics change considerably. Great news for the customer, but for the fighter, of course, things change. And, you know, like I said, if it was about the money, the fight gets cancelled straight away. But it was about a guy who wants to fight in London, who's worked for 12 weeks meticulously with his new trainer to prepare him for some of the biggest fights of his career. And he fancies it, Barry, you know, he's in that mood. It was like, I don't care who it is, you know, and obviously his team will oversee it, but he's like, I'm ready. I believe I'm in the shape and the form of my life to fight anybody on Saturday. So, of course, we've still got to do our job and go through that process. But ultimately, it was AJ's decision to move forward with the fight. And, you know, he was adamant that he get in that ring at the O2 on Saturday.
Eddie, final question. You and I have done a lot together over the last 12, 13 years. I don't think I've ever heard you like this before. You talked about after the Conor Benn fight how low you were. It can take a toll on you, can't it?
Yeah, it can, but, you know, you got oxygen in your lungs. And, I think at the end of the day, every tough situation you put yourself through, the next one's easier. So, you know, it was another kick in the proverbials. But when I got the news, you know, I didn't fall to my knees and start crying about it. I thought, here we go again. Later. Roll up your sleeves and learn on what happened last time, which I think we did a good job of this time around. And, you know, go to work. Go to work. You know, save this show. We've got a great heavyweight show on Saturday night. And, you know, you've got, in my opinion, one of the best heavyweights in the world ready to make a big statement. Yeah. Do your job for him. Make sure he gets in that ring. Make sure he builds himself into those big fights. And we're almost there.
Eddie, listen, thanks so much for your time. See you later this week. Hopefully we'll get the name tomorrow. We'll see you on Tuesday or Wednesday. Eddie Hearn, thank you so much for joining. Barry, just very, very quickly, from what you've heard there from Eddie, there's a bit of relief in his voice, but there's also a bit of weariness in his voice.
Yeah. And pragmatic about it as well, Steve. I think he learned from the Conor Benn situation. I think, you know, they've gone about it the right way. And to save the show and try and keep it integrity is a fine line. The fact that Joshua is willing to take a pay cut to let the show go ahead, I think that's a good sign. And
so do I. Barry Jones, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Thanks for Eddie Hearn to come on there and just give us the update. There's a big list. It's down to a couple. AJ's agreed them, and now a fight will be announced hopefully in the next day, if not even this evening, certainly tomorrow. Now, the podcast will also be back tomorrow with the latest from this week's fights.
Football is so much more.